Hi everyone, this is Math 101, Section 70, and this is our very first introductory lecture video. I am your instructor, Sebastian Ahmed Garay, and here we just have a quick intro video to Section 1.2, Quadratic Equations. So we're going to talk very briefly about some of the things that are going on in this section, and tomorrow in our lecture, we will finish up this section as well as starting another section. So what are we doing in this section, section 1.2? In this section, we are dealing with quadratic equations. A quadratic equation is an equation that is equivalent to one of the following form: ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. The variable here is x. The a, b, and c's, these are going to be coefficients of a quadratic function. The a, b, and c will be real numbers, with the number a not being equal to 0. You'll notice that on the screen, I didn't say explicitly that a, b, and c were real numbers. Well, I didn't say that in terms of words, right? You'll notice I wrote some symbol here. Let me actually just highlight that symbol really quickly. You'll notice that I wrote this right here. What exactly is that? That is some notation that we will talk about briefly tomorrow. You will have to get used to this notation. It's no biggie though. You'll adapt. I believe in you. So a quadratic equation is an equation equivalent to one of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0, where a, b, and c are all real numbers, with a not being equal to 0. To solve one of these types of equations, there are a few methods that are talked about briefly here in this section. To solve a quadratic equation, one of the following methods will be performed. You will either solve this by factoring, or use the square root method, or completing the square, or the quadratic formula. These last two methods, we will talk about these in class. So we'll talk about those last two methods in our class meeting tomorrow held via Zoom. We're going to talk briefly today about these first two methods, solving by factoring and solving by the square root method. So I have two quick examples here. Let's take a look at them. In this equation, you are asked to solve for x. This is a quadratic equation. You need to solve this by factoring. So how do we do this? You have x squared plus 4x equals to 0. We will factor out an x. If we do this, we have x times x plus 4 equals 0. And now we will use our zero product property to create two new equations here. When you have the product of two things equal to 0, this means that the terms of the product, you have that one of these things, one or the other, is equal to 0. The first equation gives me one solution for x. The second equation, this x plus 4 equals 0, I can solve this for x to get another solution. And now we are in fact done with this problem. Let me actually erase some of this here. Let me actually color code some of this, okay? Just so it's clear how I came up with these two equations. So that second equation, I took what was inside those red parentheses there, and I had set that thing equal to 0. And I had solved for x. Let's take a look at another problem. You have x times x plus 3 equals 10. You are told that this is a quadratic equation. That seems rather strange. Let me scroll back up to the very beginning. Back to the very beginning. A quadratic equation is an equation that is equivalent to one of the following form: ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Your equation doesn't look like that, right? So what do? We need to make it look like the format that we saw in the very beginning. You'll notice here on the left-hand side, I can distribute that x. You'll notice here also that we may subtract 10 on both sides. If I do this, I have x squared plus 3x minus 10 equals 0. And now I need to factor this thing. I'm going to factor this thing with a method that I like to call the magic x. This magic x, I will talk about this briefly tomorrow. Here's what I want. You see this negative 10 here in the quadratic equation? I want two numbers whose product is negative 10. You see that coefficient of the x there? The number that's in front of the x? You'll notice that it's a 3. I'm going to put that here. Now here's what I want. I want two numbers whose product is negative 10, whose sum is positive 3. These two numbers will be 5 and negative 2. So this equation here is going to factor into x plus 5 multiplied by x minus 2. Now here, once again, I have the product of two things equal to 0. This will allow me to create two equations here in order to solve for x. Solving for x in those equations, I have x equals negative 5 and x equals positive 2. So these are just two quick examples involving the solving of quadratic equations involving the factoring method. What about the square root method? So here I have two examples here. We need to solve for x using the square root method. We have x squared equals 36. With this quadratic equation, this one here, number 32, you already have x all by itself. Well, sort of. You have x squared by itself. So what do? We may take a square root on both sides here to solve for x. Now here we have to be careful. Whenever you take a square root, you always have a positive and a negative root, unless there is some additional information that would cause you to exclude one of those roots. Here we have no such information. So on the left, I have x, but on the right, I have two possible roots here. For the square root of 36, I have the positive root and the negative root. So we have two answers here. The back of the book is most likely going to have answers written separately, so I will write them separately here. One last example. You have x minus 1 quantity squared equals 4. I was told specifically in the directions, let me scroll up. In the directions, I need to solve that using the square root method. So I will take a square root here. We must do this to both sides. bearing in mind that we are taking a square root of a variable, so I must have a plus and a minus. On the left, I have x minus 1. On the right, I have plus or minus 2. This is going to give me two equations here. X minus 1 equals positive 2, and x minus 1 equals negative 2. Solving for x, we have x equals 3 as one answer, and x equals negative 1 as another answer. So like I said, this is just a quick introductory video. We will finish up this section today, and I will still be doing more examples involving these first two methods. That about wraps up this video. I will see you when I see you.